pro-life movement has had legs even before Roe v. Wade became the law of the land. After the right to personal autonomy was established for women, the pro-life movement had a more specific target to aim at, and the push to reverse the SCOTUS decision was on. Roe v. Wade passed in 1973, and already in 1976, the Republicans had added their first pro-life plank to their platform, and in the 1980s, Reagan courted the Evangelicals with the help of Jerry Falwell, and concocted the lie of a moral majority that overwhelmingly supported the reversal of a woman's right to choose. No such majority has ever existed. CNN has been conducting an annual poll on the issue since 1989, and at the high water mark, the greatest number of Americans who supported the overturning of Roe v. Wade was 36%. Even in today's heated climate that has led to a packing of the Supreme Court and the successful overturning of the decision, only 28% of us support that. Less than 3 out of 10. In spite of that, a cynical right-wing political machine has successfully turned America into something Americans don't want. Oh, but be careful what you wish for. Since the reversal of the decision was based on the perceived humanity of a zygote, the Alabama Supreme Court took the next logical step that leads from that. Approximately 40 to 60% of all embryos created through the IVF process become biological waste, either discarded or used on any number of research projects. When a patient was unsupervised at an Alabama IVF clinic, they somehow got access to some of these frozen embryos and dropped them, making them no longer viable. Since the Alabama Supreme Court saw these as tiny humans, they determined that dropping the tray of invisible tiny humans was tantamount to murder. Now, if the basic premise of the reversal of Roe v. Wade is taken seriously, that humanity starts at conception, who could argue the decision? One could easily consider the whole IVF industry a mechanized form of genocide sanctioned by the medical community. The decision was packaged in overtly Christian terms, making not the slightest attempt to uphold the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the Constitution. In fact, it was in direct violation. Justice Parker's concurrence on this decision made it quite clear, and I quote him: "The theologically based view of the sanctity of life adopted by the people of Alabama encompasses the following. 1, God made every person in his image. 2, each person therefore has a value that far exceeds the ability of human beings to calculate. And 3, human life cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God, who views the destruction of his image as an affront to himself. Section 3606 recognizes that this is true of unborn human life no less than it is of all other human life, that even before birth, all human beings bear the image of God, and their lives cannot be destroyed without effacing his glory." A not too subtle vivisection of one of our most fundamental rights that set our system apart from the vast majority of the rest of the world, the right to have your own religion, or none at all. It is simply not the business of the United States to suggest your religious leanings. All policy decisions must have a secular justification to be considered lawful, even if the underlying motivation may have hatched in a religious setting. It has to be carefully packaged as a religiously disinterested policy to pass the congressional smell test. Alabama isn't even trying. So let the fun begin. The intellectual backflips being attempted have only just begun. One day after the court meted out its ruling, the Alabama House and Senate rushed a bill through protecting the IVF industry and the families pursuing its treatment from civil liability for the inevitable loss of embryos during the process. Governor Kay Ivey wasted no time signing it into law. But what does that mean? The flowery words of divine justification for the decision by Justice Parker don't seem quite as inspired anymore. In a state that enjoys a Republican stronghold on its governmental levers of power, which is wholly dependent on the perception of a Christian basis for all its decision-making, when faced with its first great opportunity to stand up for their cherished beliefs, they folded like an evangelist's tent in a hurricane. IVF is a problem for the GOP because inherent in the process is the eventual destruction of otherwise viable fetuses. But the complication is that IVF makes it possible for some families to successfully become pregnant and ultimately start or expand their families, something the GOP has long not only been for, but fetishized about. By coming to the rescue of the IVF industry, they are supporting the growth of families while undermining the will of their evangelical base. Evangelicals and Alabama Supreme Court justices have made no distinction between fetuses with different addresses. Whether it lives in a nurturing, expectant mother's womb or frozen in a cryogenic state of inertia is not relevant to its divine purpose and origin. While lawmakers saw this as the law of unexpected consequences playing out that should be immediately fixed, the evangelical base saw no such contradiction, and based on Judge Parker's justification of the ruling, they would have a very solid leg to stand on. A fetus is a protected part of God's creation. Full stop. Certainly that is what the Supreme Court of Alabama had held. How is it possible to simultaneously hold the belief that a fetus is a human being under the law, but discardable biological waste in a very exclusive elite business? Torn between two lovers, feeling like a fool. There's little doubt that two of the strongest footholds the GOP has on the American landscape are the evangelical base and people with hordes of money. What do you do when they land on opposite sides of arguably your signature issue for the last 40 years? The people that pay the bills at the RNC are the same people with enough resources to pay to undermine God's clear will that they should be infertile. It's a very expensive process that typically is not covered by insurance, with the exception of some carriers that provide the coverage as an addendum service at a higher premium. It is an exclusive solution to a universal problem. Protecting the IVF industry, consequently, is not about the divine nature of the fetus. No, not at all. It is, once again, protecting the divine nature of the very well-to-do. One cycle of IVF treatment costs between $20,000 and $30,000, not available to the rank and file of the American public. Most cannot cover an emergency $400 thermostat repair for their Chevy. Contrast that with over 40% of all abortions being performed on people below the federal poverty rate, and you begin to understand that the overwhelming effect and perhaps intent of the reversal of Roe v. Wade has been to punish the lower classes and keep them in a state of want and need. When the inevitable consequences for their moneyed lifeline people bubbled to the surface in court, they were just as quick to show that there was no divinity in their great victory, only the same old tired march of greed and power. However the spin evolves to justify this contradictory application of the concept of fetal divinity, the far-right evangelical base is unlikely to give them a free pass. Since, other than the clergy, evangelicals tend to be on the lower echelon of the economic pyramid, they are unlikely to suddenly develop sympathy when Grace and Howard are being allowed to kill God babies. After just winning the Roe v. Wade war, they immediately lose hard-won territory in a peace negotiation, a negotiation they were not invited to. While I stand firmly on the pro-choice side, I have to acknowledge the lack of consistency in the aftermath of the SCOTUS reversal. If a fetus is a protected human being, and it is such due to its innate divinity, then the fact that it died in a clinic so others might live is not a decision it made, and the potential ethical loophole shuts tight. Doctors and donors made those decisions for the precious child, and if the argument is to be remotely consistent, then even with a successful pregnancy, the loss of the collateral fetal damage must be unacceptable by any measure. Forget the low information voter for a second. This is what you get from low information lawmakers. The Democrats have already reaped a windfall from the anti-American reversal of Roe v. Wade, with at least the last 3 election cycles arguably turning on this single issue. They've been handed a strange and wonderful gift by the cretins across the aisle. Will they use it to illuminate the complete lack of an ethical basis for decision-making by the Republican Party? Oh, I hope so. This is Lake, and this has been Progressively Older.